Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. Now, I just watched a video by Ben Shapiro in which he talks about the backlash against the Me Too movement. And I have a couple of questions. But before I get into that, I want to make it really clear to everybody, I'm not tearing down Ben Shapiro. I find him likable, agreeable, and entertaining. But I do have some questions, so let's get into it. Now, in his video about Me Too and the backlash, most of what he says is correct. For example, he points out that the progressive left does not believe their own rhetoric about yes means yes and no means no. But at 35 seconds into his video, Shapiro says,
"Listen, I believe consent is deeply, deeply, deeply important."
He uses the word deeply 3 times, and I have to ask why. Is it really important? Now, the doctrinal feminist model of consent, which is now the normal definition, this model of consent is a fetish. It's a sexual fetish that does not reflect how humans actually go about negotiating sex. Human sexual interaction has evolved as a complex social dance of hidden intentions over the last 500,000 years. It's nuanced, it's subtle, it's complicated, and it works really well within the context of almost all human civilizations. By contrast, the lobotomized pantomime of Mother May I consent as feminists demand does not work. Nobody has sex like that, least of all feminist men and women. So, quote, consent, as it is conceived by progressives, is not, as Ben Shapiro says, quote, deeply, deeply, deeply important. That's a lie. Consent, as progressives conceive of it, is a sexual fetish they are attempting to force onto normal people under penalty of law. But Ben Shapiro is a very intelligent and thoughtful man, so why did he say consent is deeply, deeply, deeply important, deeply 3 times? I've seen other people that I agree with say things like this in the midst of making a contrarian point, and I usually let it pass because I typically assume that they are making such a statement to be generous to the other side, to grant them some slack. But I do not think Shapiro is making a concession here for the sake of peace. I think he's telling the truth, at least as he sees it. Now, Shapiro, in his video next, points out that Matt Damon may be looking at the end of his career in Hollywood. The reason being because he pointed out that a friendly pat on the butt is not the same thing as being raped. In defense of Damon, Shapiro says
that sexual harassment is not the same as sexual assault. That saying something mean to a woman is not the same as Harvey Weinstein raping them.
And that is true. But he then goes on to say, yes, they are all bad, but a pickpocket doesn't get the same penalty as a mass murderer. My question at this point is, why is saying something mean a bad thing? Like, why is that on the same continuum as sexual assault? Not just not as bad as, why is it even on that continuum? Shapiro implies that it is.
Yes, they're all bad, but a pickpocket doesn't get punished the same way as a mass murderer.
Now, is he saying this to assuage the grievance activist on the political left, or does he believe it? Later on in his video, he talks about women who have sex that they don't want to have, but who say yes when they are propositioned, and then they say yes all the way through a sexual experience, even though they would prefer to say no. At 8 minutes into his video, Shapiro says,
if these women have a bad sexual experience, that is quite terrible. It's quite awful. I feel terrible for them.
So again, I have this question. Is he saying this to be conciliatory, or does he believe that a woman who exercises her voice and says yes when in fact she means no, and then has a bad time, that is a, quote, quite awful outcome? I used to think that Ben Shapiro would be nice to the other side, that he was being conciliatory, that he was just giving them some slack. But that does not stand up if I consider the precision of speech that he uses, his high intelligence, and his esteem for telling the truth. So, at 9 minutes 45 seconds, Shapiro is talking about female expectations, and he includes the following in what he says.
Okay, there's 2 expectations. One is that men want to have sex with you all the time. That's not an expectation, that's a reality, okay? Men want to have sex with women all the time, at least straight men.
And he continues on about women treating sex casually. Now, I want to ask you, do you see anything wrong with that quote?
Okay, there's 2 expectations. One is that men want to have sex with you all the time. That's not an expectation, that's a reality, okay? Men want to have sex with women all the time, at least straight men.
Now, I think Shapiro is not saying what he thinks progressives will agree with as a strategy to be seen as reasonable while he's making other arguments. I think he's telling the truth as he understands it. Men want to have sex with women all the time. That's not expectation, that's reality. But it's not reality, is it? It's not even reality when you're a sex-obsessed, hormone-drugged 19-year-old. And as much as men are told, or maybe scolded, for being something like a sex robot, which is always on, if it were true, it would not have been men who levered humanity out of mud huts. The age that we are in of computer-driven cars, sous vide cooking, medical technology, satellite communications, webcams on Mars rovers connected in real time to your laptop could not have happened without being men focused on something besides sex a major fraction of the time. We'd still be living in mud huts. But we are told, as men, that we are this always-on sex robot. And because we are raised by women and taught in public schools by women, we become psychologically dependent on women for our public sense of self. And if we don't deprogram ourselves, then we just continue to believe that social mythology. And Ben Shapiro, as much as he's both correct and entertaining a lot of the time, when he criticizes the regressive left, he is himself a traditionalist. And this should be a warning to us about traditionalism. We're hearing this highly intelligent, articulate, anti-feminist man tell us that women should not be responsible for their own choices or speech. He's telling us that women, who he adores as a class, have no responsibility for voluntary participation in sex. The consent model that he emphasizes as, quote, deeply, deeply, deeply important, is built on the idea that a woman is a thing to whom sex is done, or if a person, then one with no agency on whom sex is performed. All responsibility for everything lands on men in this cosmos, while all ultimate power over what's good and bad rests with women. In fact, the only real problem in that particular concept is that the creatures who now have a monopoly over the public ethic are just being a bit unreasonable at the moment, and maybe they could just calm down about this Me Too business because their subjects and vassals can't read their minds 100% of the time. Now, clearly, the present situation with Me Too, the moral panic, is unsustainable. You can't build a career working alongside people who might, at the slightest mistake in communication, socially and professionally destroy you with no penalty, no inquiry, no reality check. That's not a workable situation. And as a consequence, a lot of people are pushing for a return to a specific male and female gender roles, as in the traditional family model. Ben Shapiro, the traditionalist. Unfortunately, to buy into this, magical thinking is necessary. Specifically, the idea that women are not half the population of a species of semi-intelligent technological monkeys. Yeah, that's us. Instead, there is, at the base of both feminist and the traditionalist movement, the idea that being a woman is a spiritual condition making women into the magical source of all virtue in the world. This, my friends, is magical thinking. But Ben Shapiro, for all his eloquence, intelligence, and accomplishment, is not a man who has deprogrammed himself. Tell me, what illusions was he raised with that as an adult he subsequently recognized as false and unlearned? None. Now, to be clear, I'm not tearing him down. In fact, I find him a likable guy, I find him entertaining, I find him correct in most of what he says. But this is a guy who has told us with a straight face that women's feelings are more important than their actualization as adults, and this assertion is delivered along with his unwavering respect for women as a class of people. Magical beings for whom the normal rules of being an adult don't apply. It only sounds absurd when I articulate it like this without the implied assumptions hidden or unstated. But can anybody with their eyes opened actually pretend that a child-brained adult female Homo sapien monkey woman, and that's what women are, because we, of course, are monkey men, that this monkey woman is actually the vessel of virtue that we are supposed to pretend? People who demonstrate persistent and willful antisocial behavior should be repulsive to you, even if they've got neotenous facial features and their bodies signal sexual maturity and their attitudes signal receptivity. And that's just one of the reasons why, if I'm given the choice between the feminist dystopia, which I can see clearly, or a traditionalist world which seems normal on its surface, I'll take the world where I no longer have to believe in the fantasy. So before I say the usual sign out stuff at the end of the video, it is New Year's, or at least it's almost New Year's. So I want to thank everybody for, subscribing to the channel and giving me feedback and sending me messages and calling me names and subscribing and commenting and all that great stuff, as well as the people on Patreon helping to now support the channel, which produces content every week. So thanks to everybody, and I hope everybody has an excellent New Year. And that's it. Thanks for listening, and have a lovely day.